In this video, we're going to use a graph to calculate the slope of a line or of a linear equation. But first, let's talk about what we mean by slope. Slope tells us how the line is slanted. It tells us how much our y will change for a 1 unit change in x. So y might be increasing slowly or gradually, or our line might be steeper. And if it's steeper, then y increases more quickly. A slope could be 0, meaning that it is perfectly flat. I don't think I drew this one perfectly flat, but if it were perfectly flat, it would have a slope of 0 because it would not be increasing. The line would not be increasing or decreasing. Then finally, we need to remember that slopes can also be negative. So a line that decreases has a negative slope because y decreases as x increases. And again, that decrease could be steep or gradual. When we calculate the slope of the line is represented by m as an abbreviation in y equals mx plus b. And that slope is really a ratio, a fraction. This triangle means change. So the change in y divided by the change in x. Finding the change means finding a difference. So we'll subtract y values and subtract x values. Lines have a constant rate of change. That means that their slope stays the same for the entire line. A constant rate of change means that the line is perfectly straight. For any line, meaning perfectly straight, the slope between any 2 points on that line is the same. So when we divide, we'll get the same number for any 2 points on a line because lines are perfectly straight. And that's what we mean by a constant rate of change. The rate of change is the same over the whole line. It's whatever we get as this answer. Cool. So the steps for calculating the slope: first, choose points for which you know the exact values. For example, when I calculate the slope of this line below, I'm not going to choose this point because it's hard for me to know exactly what the value is. Whereas these points that land right on the intersections of the grid, I know exactly. So those are the kinds of points that I'll use to calculate my slope. Then find the change in y, the numerator. Find the change in x, the denominator. Double check that you have your correct positive and negative. We'll show what that means in a minute. And then finally, divide your change in y by your change in x to get a number for your slope. Then finally, we'll talk about the meaning of slope. So in this case, it is for every hour, because x represents the numbers of hours worked. For every hour worked, Natalie's, her earnings in dollars, Natalie's earnings measured on the y-axis, and then either increase or decrease. We're going to circle one of those by blank dollars. All right, so now let's calculate the slope here. So my value for y1 is 275. My value for x1 is 20. My value for y2 is 750. my value for x2 is 40. I'll use colors as I do this so you can see which one is which. So I'm using this equation. So I'm going to have y2 minus y1. Then that will be my change in y. My change in x, x2 is 40 minus x1 is 20. Now, find that change in y. So 750 minus 275 is 475. And 40 minus 20 is 20. So this says for every 20 hours that Natalie works, her earnings increase by $475. So now let's figure out what Natalie is making per hour. I have a quick mistake to fix rather. This Y value is not 275. It is 375. Which means my value of Y1 is 375. Which means that when I subtract 750 minus 375 is 375. Okay, so now we'll divide. So this equals $18.75 per hour. That means for every hour worked, Natalie's earnings increase by $18.75. That's the same as saying that Natalie makes $18.75 per hour. We'll do one other quick example. So especially because I messed it up on the last problem, let's make sure that we plotted our points correctly. So our first point on the line as we read from left to right is here. We know this exact point. It's at x equal -4, y equal +3. Then the next point that we know on the line is 0, 0 at the origin. So we said we needed to be careful of positives and negatives, and this is an example of that. Okay. So my y2 is 0 minus my y1 is +3. My x2 is also 0. Then my y2 is -4. Notice that the subtraction from our equation stays. And then if a value is negative, that negative also comes in. Zero minus 3 is -3. 0 minus -4. When we subtract a negative, we can think of that as adding a positive. 0 minus -4 is +4. So the slope of this line is -3/4. And if you wanted to write this as a decimal, this is -0.75.